We're about to delve into the dark and twisted minds of some of history's most notorious serial killers. Catch me if you can. The Zodiac Killer's game of cat and mouse. First up, we have the Zodiac Killer, the cryptic Casanova who terrorized California in the late 1960s. Beginning with the shooting of two teenagers in Lover's Lane in December 1968, he craved the spotlight more than a B-movie actor. He taunted the police and the media with cryptic letters, boasting of his crimes and challenging them to decipher his codes and if they could ever identify him. Imagine a killer who leaves calling cards signed Riddler from Batman, except way creepier and with a much higher body count. The Zodiac's reign of terror was shrouded in more mystery. We don't even know for sure how many victims he claimed, though he bragged to the authorities about a number as high as 37. Despite an intense investigation, the Zodiac Killer managed to slip through their fingers like a greased-up Houdini. DNA evidence? That just pointed to a bunch of different dead ends. He vanished like a magician's trick, leaving behind only 5 confirmed murders and a whole lot of unanswered questions. John Wayne Gacy, the killer clown nobody saw coming. John Wayne Gacy, also known as Pogo the Clown, might just be the champion of creeps on this list. By day, he was the picture-perfect party pal, all goofy grin and oversized red shoes. But under the grease paint and wig lurked a monster. He'd lure young men and boys to his Norwood Park Township lair with promises of work, using classifieds like fishing nets to snag his victims. Gacy wasn't exactly subtle about his dark side. Neighbors complained about a stench coming from his home, but who questions the friendly neighborhood clown? Well, the stench finally got the better of him. In 1978, the cops followed their noses straight to a house of horrors. Turns out, Pogo's crawl space wasn't just for storing dusty decorations. It was a mass grave for at least 33 young men he'd snatched between 1972 and 1978. This wasn't just some psycho snap. Gacy was playing a twisted game. Investigators found journals filled with chilling details of his crimes, trophies he kept from his victims, mementos of his sick satisfaction. It was all a game to him, and a game that apparently brought him a whole lot of twisted joy. In 1980, the jig was finally up. Gacy got slapped with 33 murder charges and a one-way ticket to death row. But even facing his own demise, the man couldn't resist one last pathetic act. His final words were, "Kiss my ass." The all-American nightmare, Ted Bundy's charming facade. Ted Bundy, the poster boy for wolves in sheep's clothing. This guy was smooth as silk, a charming chameleon who could talk his way out of anything. All smiles and charisma on the surface, but underneath lurked a monster with a heart as black as moonless night. He preyed on young women, using his good looks and a carefully crafted air of helplessness to gain their trust. Bundy was a master manipulator. He could spin a yarn so convincing you'd swear you were helping a lost puppy, not a sadistic predator. This chilling act worked for almost 4 years. Between 1974 and 1978, he embarked on a multi-state killing spree, targeting young women and girls. His MO? He'd play the part, an authority figure, someone in need of assistance. A fake arm cast, a limp, anything to disarm his victims. It wasn't just about appearing harmless, it was about getting them close enough to snatch them away to unleash the horror that lurked beneath the charming facade. And the horror? It was worse than you can imagine. Bundy wasn't a one-and-done kind of monster. He'd revisit the scenes of his crimes, acting out unspeakable acts. He even kept trophies, the severed heads of at least 12 victims, a grim reminder of his twisted obsession. Despite the darkness in his soul, Bundy walked among us for years. He dated, held a job, blended in perfectly. The perfect disguise for a monster. It wasn't until his trial in Florida that the mask finally slipped. Bundy, ever the charmer, tried to play the victim card, blaming a dysfunctional childhood and some made-up pornography addiction. But the evidence spoke for itself, a symphony of terror that Bundy couldn't conduct his way out of. he was sentenced to death, a small comfort for the lives he shattered. Milwaukee Cannibal: Jeffrey Dahmer's descent into madness. Jeffrey Dahmer's crimes were ripped straight from a horror movie script, and even Hollywood couldn't have conjured something this depraved. This cannibalistic monster targeted young men, primarily African Americans, luring them back to his apartment like a spider weaving a web. There, the nightmare began. Drugged and defenseless, his victims became playthings in Dahmer's own private hell. Dahmer wasn't just a killer, he was a deranged artist who used human flesh as his canvas. His acts were beyond monstrous: necrophilia, cannibalism, a grotesque obsession with preserving body parts as trophies. The worst part? He nearly got away with it all. He dismembered his victims with chilling precision, disposing of their remains like yesterday's garbage. It was a macabre dance he thought he could keep performing indefinitely. But then, one of his victims escaped, a single spark of defiance that shattered Dahmer's twisted illusion of control. Dahmer's apartment became a charnel house. Skulls, hands, even genitalia. These were his souvenirs, a testament to his depravity. He even experimented on some of his victims, drilling into their heads and pumping them with chemicals in a sick attempt to create a living zombie. Thankfully, Dahmer's reign of terror finally ended in 1991. He was convicted of murdering 15 men and boys, though he confessed to more. The true number of victims might have been even higher, silenced forever by Dahmer's blade. One shudders to think what might have been if his last victim hadn't fought back. The world may never know the full extent of Dahmer's monstrosity. But one thing is certain, he remains a chilling reminder of the darkness that can lurk behind a seemingly ordinary facade. Jack the Ripper, the Whitechapel Spectre. Jack the Ripper, a name that'll send shivers down your spine. This Victorian villain wasn't exactly a mass murderer by body count. Think of him as a serial killer with a boutique operation. 5 victims, each one with their throat slashed with surgical precision. Sure, other serial killers may have racked up more victims, but Jack was more of a psychopathic artisan. He vanished like a magician's trick, leaving the Whitechapel district in a perpetual state of terror. Now, these weren't exactly high society victims. Poor prostitutes down on their luck who probably thought they were just getting paid for a night's work. The Ripper's handiwork fueled wild speculation. Knowledge of anatomy was preserved for the posh, not the poor, which made him seem like a bloody brainiac. The authorities didn't exactly prioritize protecting these women of the night. Most folks figured they had it coming anyway. Despite a suspect list longer than a Victorian novel, Jack the Ripper remains a chilling enigma, a reminder that sometimes the scariest monsters are the ones who leave the fewest but the most unforgettable marks. Charles Manson, the cult leader who orchestrated mayhem. Charles Manson wasn't exactly a hands-on killer. Think of him more as the mastermind behind a murder orchestra, conducting a symphony of violence from his comfy California lair. This cult leader, with the charisma of a rattlesnake, lured in a group of young followers, the Manson family. Think devoted fans, but with a taste for blood instead of concert merch. He preached a dark gospel of race war he called Helter Skelter. The plan? Pin a series of celebrity murders on black gangs, sparking a chaotic race war that Manson presumably would emerge from like some twisted hippie kingpin. In August of 1969, things went from cult hangout to full-blown horror movie. Under Manson's orders, his family brutally murdered actress Sharon Tate and 4 others at her home. The next night, they killed couple Leno and Rosemary Lenka in their home, leaving messages written in blood at both crime scenes that read "Death to Pigs," to make it seem that this was committed by gangs. Manson himself never got his hands dirty. He was the puppet master, yanking the strings of his devoted followers and letting them do the dirty work. The man was pure manipulation, a charismatic cult leader who turned his followers into automatons of violence. Manson's reward for masterminding this macabre masterpiece was a life sentence. Ed Gein, the butcher of Plainfield, with a taste for the macabre. Ed Gein, a Wisconsin farmer, was the picture of rural normalcy, at least until you peeked behind the curtain. See, Ed's basement wasn't exactly stocked with pickles and jams. After his harsh mother shuffled off this mortal coil, grave robbing became his new hobby, collecting body parts like some deranged archaeologist. We're talking lampshades and furniture reupholstered in human skin. But Ed wasn't content with just a creepy home decor makeover. Turns out he also dabbled in murder. 2 women to be exact. When the cops finally came knocking, they discovered a house of horrors that would make even Freddy Krueger take a Xanax. Ed's cozy farmhouse was more like a museum of morbid curiosities, with furniture fashioned from human remains and enough spare body parts to open a macabre department store. Further investigation revealed Ed's twisted obsession with his deceased mother, fueling his graveyard sprees. The guy was eventually diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia and deemed legally insane, but that didn't make his crimes any less horrifying. In fact, they were so messed up, they inspired a whole genre of horror movies, including Psycho and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. The Night Stalker, Richard Ramirez's Reign of Terror. California in the mid-1980s wasn't exactly a sunshine paradise. Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, specialized in turning home invasions into personal horror shows for entire families. His MO? Extremely violent, satanic, late-night break-ins. The Night Stalker cast a long shadow. The manhunt was relentless, and for good reason. This wasn't just a murderer, this was a sadist who reveled in inflicting pain. Ramirez wasn't exactly a subtle criminal. Leaving satanic symbols everywhere earned him the whole Night Stalker nickname. His reign of terror didn't last forever. A group of brave citizens of East Los Angeles recognized him from a police sketch and ended his little party in August 1985. Ramirez's trial was a whole other nightmare. The guy basked in his infamy, flashing devil horns at cameras and taunting the victims' families. Things got even weirder when one of the jurors mysteriously died during the trial in 1989. Conspiracy theories ran wild. Did Ramirez have some dark magic mojo? In the end, Ramirez got what he deserved, a hefty sentence and a lifetime spent reminiscing about his crimes behind bars. Justice got finally served. California could finally sleep soundly. The Rostov Ripper, a monster among us. Andrei Chikatilo, the Rostov Ripper, this monster wasn't exactly a product of a happy childhood. Chikatilo thrived in the Soviet Union of the 70s and 80s. This was a perfect hunting ground for a predator with a taste for the macabre. Chikatilo targeted the vulnerable, women and children, the easiest prey to lure away with promises of candy or a better life. Once alone, the facade would shatter, and Chikatilo would unleash a nightmare. The Soviet authorities, who were lacking the latest forensic CSI techniques, spent years chasing their tails. It wasn't until a routine ID check that Chikatilo finally got snagged. The trial, Chikatilo, the monster who once lurked in the shadows, now reveled in the spotlight, describing his crimes in detail. His reign of terror finally ended when he got convicted of 52 murders and sentenced to death by firing squad in 1994. These are the most notorious psycho killers explained.